Hello everybody, welcome along to the Event Industry News Podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing you a very good morning, afternoon or evening, whenever or wherever you are tuning into today's podcast from. And on today's episode, I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Craig Mathie from Bournemouth Sevens and Steve Jones from FesTech. Guys, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much.
As I said, both of these gentlemen, even though they're from two separate organisations, are working collaboratively on the Bournemouth Sevens event. And today on the podcast, we're going to be looking at practical uses of technology at events. We'll find out specifically why that's applicable and why that whole subject is relevant to the work that the guys are doing. But Craig, first of all, for our viewers who may not be familiar with Bournemouth Sevens, tell us a little bit about the history of the event and what it actually is.
So Bournemouth Sevens Festival was founded in 2008. We're coming up to the 12th year of the festival this year, and effectively we bill ourselves as the UK's favourite sport and music festival, and we are very proud to welcome sort of 400 teams along to the festival each year, taking part in rugby, netball, dodgeball, hockey and volleyball tournaments, and they kind of create the sort of core ethos of our festival. And over the course of the weekend, we combine that with a music festival with kind of a whole host of different party arenas and those kind of things, welcoming around sort of 30,000 people to the festival over the course of that last May bank holiday weekend. As I said, been kind of growing year on year since we launched back in 2008, and the business was founded by Roger Woodall, who's still our CEO. We've been doing really cool things over the last couple of years, taking away a number of different awards kind of across the sector. And we really like what we do, and been delivering it for quite a while now.
And Steve, as I said at the top of the episode, you're the MD of FesTech, so you're working with Bournemouth Sevens, presumably as a supplier, but your role is much deeper than that. Certainly this year. Give us a little bit of background first of all into FesTech and what you guys do.
Okay, so FesTech is part of PSD Group, which is a company specialising in communications and technology. We work across a number of different verticals, all the way from education to the events industry, designing and deploying IT solutions, communication solutions specific to those particular areas. One area we excel in is the kind of bespoking of products and services, and you can't really get much more bespoke than the needs of the events industry because everything is different. There's the same underlying needs, but the deployments are different and challenging from event to event, which is what keeps things interesting.
Absolutely. And going back to what I said at the start of the episode about today's subject, if you can call it that, practical uses of technology at events. Craig, you mentioned you've got 30,000 people that are attending this event now. You've got multiple different sports. You've presumably got hundreds of participants within those sports as well as audience members. You're working in what I presume to be multiple locations in one particular town. There must be quite a heavy reliance on various different types of technology to help manage and the actual operation side of that. Yeah,
absolutely. And we've seen the kind of reliance on technology grow, particularly over maybe the last 5 or 6 years, and that kind of grows from every facet of the event really. So that goes from the planning stages all the way through kind of safety, emergency, contingency planning, and then specifically kind of into the live event delivery, which I think is kind of the idea to chat around today, and kind of taking those practical uses of technology of ways of improving your own event and making sure that it's delivered sort of successfully. And there's a massive range of those. They come from things such as scanning people onto site, which has obviously been a massive thing since the invention of predominantly online ticketing, moving through to CCTV, which for many people such as ourselves is a licensing requirement nowadays, and the expectation to have kind of venue quality CCTV in an outdoor environment is a very challenging one, but it's something that is becoming more and more kind of expected, specifically to adhere to licensing objectives, but also to manage crowd flows, to understand what your queues look like, how long people have been in the kind of the vicinity of the festival. So those kind of nuts and bolts are really key. Things such as EPOS. So across our bar system at Bournemouth Sevens, we run our own bars. So we have to put our own kind of till system in with a range of PDQs, with the kind of movement of people paying into kind of contactless and getting used to Apple Pay and Android Pay. And also this year we're looking at rolling things out such as an app for communicating with the festival audience, and also to contain the scores from all the different tournaments, and to replace what we have done historically, which is having things such as like whiteboards with the rugby tournament scores on them, and actually replacing those with the app and the ability to see how your team's getting on across the weekend. So there's some lovely bits in that in terms of audience engagement and being able to communicate with your audience and effectively market them sort of across the 12 months of the year. But also, as I kind of alluded to before those references, it's about keeping people safe, keeping the event functioning, keeping it moving smoothly and securely, really. And without technology, we couldn't do that. We genuinely couldn't. And it's really important for us. And I guess the flip side of that as well is we're still an independently owned festival. We don't have massive kind of Live Nation style budgets to throw at delivering technology at events. So every kind of penny we spend into managing our event, be it in marquees or whatever, has always got to be really effectively kind of thought out. So often the tech sector, I think, comes to you with an idea which may cost a fortune, and we're just not in the place to do it. But we have to look at solutions which are cost effective. They actually have a positive impact on delivering the event, and are practical as well.
And I guess, Craig, that this is where Steve comes in with FesTech and taking a bigger role in terms of the operations side of things at the event, is when we talk about making things, not just practical, but actually having a definite cost benefit and being able to justify the investment that goes in there. You have to make sure that you're using those systems in the most efficient way possible and to the absolute best the potential that system operates and offers. Steve, when you first worked with Bournemouth Sevens, how has your sort of client relationship developed into a point now where you're essentially part of the team there?
It's evolved year on year. So my first involvement with Bournemouth Sevens was without the tech hat, really, was from the event controller side of things. And that's a role I continue to adopt to date. But I've always been working with the business I'm working with, although without the focus on the event side, so the technology side. So I've been watching and learning from those who have come and gone over the years as far as the technical side goes, and along with the understanding that I've developed of the event and the way it works, been able to adapt our offering to make sure we can deliver relevant technology. I think that's the key. First and foremost is developing a robust backbone network for the entire thing. Without having that in place, no matter what you're going to put on top of it is not going to work properly. And avoiding the whole tech for tech's sake type of idea. I'm quite forward in that if I don't think something's going to work or isn't going to work properly, I'll make a suggestion that perhaps we don't go down that road, or that we adapt it until it does. So the core network is our key, and we layer those services on that network. So top of the pile or bottom, whichever way you're looking at it, is the safety side of things. That is the layer that has to work regardless of what happens. So this is your CCTV and any communications, because we run a voice communication network across the site as well, allowing access to people from outside to call in, for us to call out, for emergency services, for cash office, that sort of thing. And then you layer the other bits on top of that. So EPOS is going to be the next layer on top, because at the end of that, without that, there is no event if the event's not taking money. And then the top and I suppose the least important in terms of the event running smoothly is the customer engagement piece. At the end of the day, the event can still run if there is no public Wi-Fi, but equally it's making sure that we have the priority set across the network for that, but we need to make sure that we never impact on the safety critical services.
One thing we've not identified yet, Craig, is the actual venue itself, and that will certainly perhaps help paint a picture to people listening or watching today's podcast about what we're talking about when we talk about multiple venues, multiple sites across a large area. Just paint a picture of the actual venue itself, whereabouts it sits within Bournemouth, and what the actual venue is.
Yeah, so Bournemouth Sevens takes place on Bournemouth Sports Club, which is a 65-acre sports facility, just on the edge of Bournemouth, in a small town called Christchurch, and we've been running there since we launched. It's an amazing facility, which is used for the balance of the year as a sporting facility. So it has just a plethora of rugby pitches, football pitches, AstroTurf, and kind of a whole host of that sort of thing. So we recondition some of that. We don't have football at Bournemouth Sevens, so we use those pitches as campsite. But we have, as I said, 8 rugby pitches, 2 hockey pitches, 12 netball courts, ultimate frisbee and dodgeball as well, as I mentioned sort of in the introduction. So the facility is an amazing one. It's probably quite different from your typical outdoor event location. It's not kind of agricultural land, and we benefit from that in some really practical ways, things such as kind of drainage and all those kind of bits as well that maybe are issues in bad weather. But from a technology point of view, it's in its natural state. It's in the dark ages, so it runs with a 4 meg ADSL BT line, which just isn't fit for purpose. For actually, one of the things that we had to do very on in the piece of working with Steve and his team is identify a way to get connectivity into the event, and we use a local wireless provider called Wide FM, who are able to give us sort of 100 meg in place of that 4 meg, and actually that's a critical part of what we do as well. So, I mean, very much the approach that we like to take here is working in partnership with people and building relationships with local companies that can help deliver services on site. I think there's a tendency in events world generally to focus on maybe 2 or 3 of the kind of national providers or the most well-known. And we have worked with those in the past, and we do work with those kind of individuals across some sectors. But for us, probably one of the real wins in this process was being able to engage Steve and his team at FesTech, because they're based locally and because they understand our event and our locality. And not that they ever do, but if you forget a piece of kit, it's 10 minutes down the road. It's not arriving next day on a delivery. So that's been a real benefit for us, and a really nice kind of starting place for the relationship. And it also means that we can do things where the planning is so integral to the actual effective delivery of the service on site. So it's your delivery is only as good as your plan, and being able to work again locally to kind of to conceive the ideas and conceive the concepts and test things is really a great way to do things.
And on that sort of on that note, when you're talking about the practical uses of technology at an event, it sounds like we're not just talking about the operations whilst the event is live, but presumably now in its 12th or approaching the 12th edition, you're going to be able to reflect back on previous years and information that you've gathered using this technology over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years in order to look at it. And when I refer to the CCTV that you have to put in as a licensing requirement, Steve, you pointed out that that's a safety measure, but it can also be used as an operational measure in future planning, can't it? If you look back on footage and you can see where certain pinch points were or how people moved from a certain part of the site to another part of the site, that can affect your site planning for the next year.
Yeah, one thing I've found through the years of working with Bournemouth Sevens pre-FesTech and during is that no year is the same. There are lessons that I learn every year, and the nice thing is that the team will implement those improvements. And it's I think every year the phrase "wow, that went even smoother than last year," and we thought the previous year was smooth, happened, which is just testament to the level of planning that the guys do from an event deployment perspective, because it just makes so much of a difference. But having that historic information is very useful. You're right.
Yeah, I think just one other point, if I may, in there as well is scanners. So we work with Eventbrite on our ticketing and use their scanning platform to be able to monitor people and work out when people are arriving. And we use that data kind of day to day in our planning for staffing levels and working out at which points of the day we're going to be most busy with actual ingress into the event site. So that data and that is absolutely key to delivering the event successfully in future years as well. So.
I know it's moving a little bit off the technology side of it, but it's a question that raised my curiosity when you mentioned about the sensitivity of the site, the fact that it's not, a farmer's field. I'm not suggesting that events that run on farmer's field can leave it in any state, but you're dealing with what sounds to be like very, very well kept sports pitches on a very, very sort of well established sports complex. How important is it to sort of be sensitive to what that site is used for most of the year when it comes to pitching up tents and getting vehicles on and off site? How is your planning affected by the type of facility that you're actually working on?
Yeah, 100%. I think it has numerous positives. As I said, the benefit of it being on sports grounds is the pitches all have French drainage underneath, so like the site drains amazingly well. So bad weather is probably less of an issue than it would be maybe in an agricultural site. But you're exactly right. We have to look after it. We have to treat it well, and we put obviously all the hard infrastructure that you'd envisage going into a festival site down. So temporary roadway, aluminium roadway. Those kind of things. Also make sure we have kind of suitable facilities to get around the site and not cause damage to the grounds. We have to have a few specific rules which are probably slightly different to other events. So we don't allow kind of glass or cans onto our campsite because, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, our campsite is football pitches for the balance of the year. So as soon as kind of a smash bottle ends up in the grass, it's not there during the pickup process, but it sort of shows its head maybe 6 months later. So yeah, that's really important. We do have some really practical solutions. We run metal detectors over the campsite and the glamp site after we've finished with the cleanup operation to make sure there's no metal left in the ground. As I said, and then just practical measures such as having a really skilled and committed litter picking team who care about as much about the site as we do, making sure that it's left probably in a better state than we found it in some occasions as well. So yeah, it is a really important part of the process.
Going back to the technology side of things, Steve, you said something that interested me earlier, which is, not using tech just for tech's sake. And there are perhaps events who could be looked at as being guilty of deploying tech where they maybe don't really need it, or maybe don't even know how to deploy it properly and effectively. It can actually cause more issues than it's actually solved. As an event, do you get approached by other suppliers of technology who might want to see their tech deployed at your event? And what would the vetting process be when you're looking at a new way of doing something?
I suppose the most obvious time that happens is when there are other providers that are providing service, for example, AV and things like that, that perhaps want to start using lumps of wireless spectrum across the site to fire a video signal over to a big screen or something like that. Without wanting to sound too geeky, in this sort of environment, wireless spectrum is one of your biggest commodities, because you need as much bandwidth as possible, but it needs to be stable. If things aren't deployed properly outside of your network, then you can wipe out huge chunks of a safety critical network by trying to fire a video signal at a big screen. So our view is very much to work as closely as we can with everybody that's on site. And if there is a problem, don't just say there's a problem, deal with it. It's to work out a solution. Now, if that means we do need to move part of our network out the way to make way for them, it's in the greater good of the event, so that's what we'll do. From a technology side of things, you will get the odd approach from people looking at particular ways of doing things, and the first thing we would do is look at the value from an events perspective for what that piece of technology is going to do. So there's various bits of technology out there to do sort of heat mapping and things like that, and most of that revolves around historic heat mapping. On a distributed event like this, the value of that information, depending on how it's deployed, can really vary, and also the added overhead that can add can have an effect. So it's really looking at the overall value at the end, and then making room for that within the deployment in order to make sure it's done sensibly.
Yeah. How would you utilise the systems that you've now got at your disposal, Craig, on a day-to-day basis when the show is actually live? Will you debrief at the end of each day and actually utilise some of these systems to make changes for day 2, day 3, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're constantly as I mentioned earlier, scanner numbers, entry numbers will give us a really clear indication of how many of our suspected audience have arrived or are still to arrive, and that will influence kind of patterns. Also looking into wider macro systems that give us a clue in terms of weather and what that's going to look like as well. And we're doing a lot of work this year in terms of revamping our control room. To mean that all the information that we have coming into that space is visible to everyone kind of located in that area. And the multi-agency control room that we operate is kind of one of the real success stories of the safety side of Bournemouth Sevens. And that's kind of ridden on the back of technology, and being completely honest, and having that visibility of what's happening where, how it's happening, monitoring weather and incoming kind of any weather instances or anything like that is all really kind of part of it, and the communication that comes out of that makes the event run kind of safely and effectively. And just if I may, just picking up on kind of technology that you kind of get sold in a lot, one of those for me is project management software and those kind of things, which we're to a certain extent sort of inundated with new offerings and new providers and new suppliers, and for me, I've tried a few of them, and I've never found many things which are kind of custom fit to the events industry. The events industry is such a unique beast in terms of how it operates, that understanding it and tailoring that into a package or a piece of software is a challenge. That's coming from someone who's feverishly loyal to Google Docs and spreadsheets and those kind of things. But this year we are giving WeTrack a go, and that's a piece of software like an instant management software, and also look to replace some of the kit that we're using with run sheets. So, but again, often it requires a partnership approach in the first year of working with someone like that. When you're a small business or an independent festival, you need both the organizer and the supplier to go, we see that this could develop into something really cool. We're prepared to take a bit of a calculated gamble on either side to roll the event. It reduces workload rather than increasing workload, because there's always that risk that you spend more time processing stuff or moving stuff into another system when it's not actually saving you any time or energy.
Absolutely. And when we talk about efficiencies, Steve, going back to what we said right at the very start about making sure that it's an efficient use of systems, most events now will work across multiple different systems, won't they? So when we're talking about efficiencies, it's not just the practical benefit of what a particular system brings to a show operations, but it's also about how efficient those multiple systems can work with each other, and you're not increasing the workload of people who are having to use those systems.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, there's a huge reliance. And there's often two very similar platforms, for example, that could be used by two sides of the event organisation team, and that's purely because, as Craig was saying, you've always got a group of people that are fiercely loyal to Google Docs or things like that, and actually there is a lot of scope for taking a bit of a step back and trying to do some integration in that, because the level of communication that can be done on a single software platform can actually save a huge amount of time, more so than the perceived time difference that some people may say, well, learning how to use this, what I'm doing, or adapting it, and they have to get used to it and see it and go, actually, yes, this is saving me a huge amount of time and making things more efficient.
Yeah, I think as the WeTrack example that I used just earlier, we're sort of using that to replace systems, different logging systems that we as an event use, which our security provider use, which our medical provider use, which our health and safety team use, and consolidating those into one, and everyone using the same system and having visibility of that system. For me, that's a practical implication of technology, and that's actually how it does work and how it does benefit your event. The proof will be in the pudding with that system, and I've got no kind of real concerns about it, but it is new for us, so we'll kind of come out the other side of the festival and understand the impact that's had. But yeah, and that kind of comes back to the whole kind of emphasis of what we've been talking about. It's ways that you can use kit and ideas to make things easier rather than just doing them for the sake of it.
Sure. And sometimes when we talk about using things effectively and making life a little bit easier, again, from experience, you can see events have sometimes deployed new technology and gone all in, and they've tried to use everything facet of that particular system in the first year, and that's where they'll fall down. There's a lot to be said for maybe going, you know, a little bit softer into stuff like this. And as you're alluding to with WeTrack, saying, look, we appreciate it can possibly do this, but the first year, why don't we just use it for this and then make it work properly and then evolve?
Yeah, and that's supplier wide. That's not just technology. So whenever we start working with a new fencing provider or a new toilet provider or a new audio contractor, we'll say actually, and we're doing it this year with audio. Actually, let's put a few little PA systems in to look after our sporting tournaments. Let's take those off and know where we might grow to kind of work together in the future. And I think that's a really kind of practical example. And coming up to the 12th year of Bournemouth Sevens, that's something that we've really liked. We are fiercely loyal in terms of who we operate with, and some of our contractors we've been working with since the first year of the festival, but we do kind of keep constantly evolving them and making sure that they are everyone remains on their game, which is really important because it's easy to kind of get stale and kind of get stuck in a pattern. So we're always looking at contingencies, ways that people can we can work with different companies to work on different areas. Effectively, that's how we started working with Steve. Steve was on site as a controller and solved a few kind of technical issues from us with our old provider of the on-site network. And that kind of led into a conversation that said, well, actually, could we do it? Could we work together on it? And you never know where those kind of, in business, where those relationships might develop from kind of starting at a sensible and manageable level.
Absolutely, and from a business point of view, in terms of the locality, the geographical location of the event itself, you mentioned very briefly about working with suppliers who are quite local to the area. And when you talk about the AV side of things and maybe bringing in some smaller contractors to deliver certain elements, it brings that ownership, doesn't it, to an event. It's good for everybody, for local businesses, for the local economy, for everybody that's involved.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're really proud of that. And working local is, in my opinion, is a really sensible way to go. There are particular areas where it makes sense to work with experts from across the country, and we're really proud to do that. But actually, some of our best and our favourite suppliers are local, and it is because they care. They care more because it's on their doorstep. And people like Mathie, who we've worked with since the first year of the festival, Wolf Lighting, I can literally just reel them off. We've built relationships with these companies. And they've started small with us, and they've grown and grown and grown. FesTech is another example, obviously working with Steve, and we have a very similar relationship with a company called County Epos, who provide our tills on site, and they're based locally. So just working local and intelligently, I think, is a really nice way to do it. On a practical level, with bigger stuff, it makes sense on transport terms and all those kind of things as well. So we're proud to be a slightly different event and a slightly different business model that's working in its own way, and being independent means that we effectively, our small team of 7 that are in the office day to day can make the call on who's the right person to work with, and doesn't get kind of bundled up in bureaucracy trying to change a supplier or something like that.
Sure. We've been joined on the podcast today by Craig, Mathie and Steve Jones from the Bournemouth Sevens Festival. The festival itself, if I'm right in saying, is the 24th to the 26th of May 2019. That's the end of May bank holiday weekend, if memory serves me. If people want to find out more about the festival and the event, Craig, how do they get in touch with you guys?
Yes, so we are really easy to find online. So we're at bournemouth7s.com, and we're kind of across social media as well. So tickets are available. They're still on sale. They're going exceptionally well. And yeah, we have a kind of a whole host of opportunities for people to come along, whether they want to come along and play in the sport. And as I mentioned, we've got those 5 different sports taking place over the weekend, 400 teams and sort of 5,000 players in those. But if you just want to come along and watch or make the most of just a truly amazing festival atmosphere, then general admission tickets are available as well, and people can come along for the day or camp with us or glamp with us and make the most of a sunny weekend, fingers crossed, down in Bournemouth over that last May bank holiday weekend.
Fingers crossed for some good weather for you guys. I know it's always a moot point when it comes to festivals and outdoor events in the UK, but I always say fingers crossed for some good weather for you. Best of luck to it. If you're watching today's episode of the podcast via eventindustrynews.com, head over to your chosen podcast platform and download the audio-only versions of the podcast. We've got versions going back right to the start of the Event Industry News podcast. Great to listen to on your commute to and from work. If you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, hop over to eventindustrynews.com, where you can see a video of today's podcast, and you can also check up on the latest news and features from Event Industry News. Thanks very much again to our guests today, Craig Mathie and Steve Jones from the Bournemouth Sevens Festival. My name's James Dickson, and we'll see you on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Thanks very much, everybody. Goodbye.